behind the walls of the Ottoman Harem. For centuries, the Ottoman Harem has been wrapped in mystery, myth, and fantasy. Western travelers spoke of it in whispers, artists painted it with exotic imagination, and writers often turned it into a symbol of forbidden pleasure. But behind the ornate gates of Topkapi Palace, the reality was far stranger and far stricter than most people ever realized. The harem was not a free space of indulgence, nor a palace of unrestrained intimacy. It was a system, built on discipline, secrecy, and rules so peculiar that even the sultans themselves were bound by them. Every interaction was regulated, every movement recorded, and every night in the sultan's chamber unfolded under the weight of tradition and protocol. At its core, the harem was not just about pleasure, it was about power. The women who lived there were carefully selected, trained, and controlled. Their beauty and skills made them desirable, but their ability to survive depended entirely on how well they obeyed the invisible web of rules that governed every aspect of their existence. For the Sultan, the harem was both a sanctuary and a prison. He was the most powerful man in the empire, yet even in his own bedroom he was hemmed in by laws passed down through generations. A single misstep could endanger dynastic succession, disrupt political balance, or invite scandal that weakened the throne. What were these rules? Why did they exist? And how did they shape the lives of the women and men trapped inside this hidden world? To answer that, we must step beyond the fantasies of Orientalist paintings and into the cold reality of history, where bedroom politics became state politics and intimacy itself was turned into a weapon of control. The rule of no overnight stays, when the Sultan had to leave his own bed. One of the strangest rules of the Ottoman harem was this: the Sultan was rarely allowed to spend the whole night with a concubine. After intimacy, the woman was expected to return to her quarters before dawn. The Sultan himself often slept alone. This may sound surprising. After all, the harem has long been imagined as a place where the Sultan lived in constant luxury, surrounded by women day and night. But the reality was much more controlled. The logic behind the rule was both practical and political. First, it was about avoiding favoritism. If one woman remained in the Sultan's bed overnight, others might interpret that as special preference. In the ruthless world of the harem, such favoritism could spark jealousy, rivalries, and even conspiracies that threatened palace stability. Rotating partners and ensuring no woman overstayed her place was a way of keeping balance among the Sultan's household. Second, it was about security. Even in the innermost chambers of Topkapi Palace, assassination plots were a constant fear. Allowing women to linger overnight near the Sultan could create opportunities for betrayal. By keeping the chamber clear, the Sultan minimized his vulnerability. Finally, it was about discipline. The Ottoman dynasty survived for centuries, not just because of military might, but because of its strict control over succession. Keeping the Sultan's intimate life regulated was a way of ensuring that heirs were legitimate, carefully tracked, and free of scandal. Of course, there were exceptions. A concubine who bore a son often gained higher status, and in some cases, the Sultan might keep her closer for longer periods. But even then, the expectation remained: no woman could monopolize the Sultan's nights. This strange rhythm intimacy, followed by enforced separation, set the tone for the entire harem system. It made clear that relationships here were never personal. They were transactions of power, overseen by rules designed to protect the throne above all else. And this wasn't the only rule. Another, even stranger law determined how many children a concubine could have and what happened if she broke it. In the Ottoman harem, motherhood was the surest path to power, but even here, the rules were unforgiving. The most important of them was simple yet ruthless. One concubine could give birth to only one son. At first glance, this might seem strange. Why would an empire obsessed with heirs limit the number of sons a woman could bear? The answer lay in the politics of succession. Too many sons from the same mother could tilt the balance of power, giving her disproportionate influence over the dynasty. By enforcing the rule of one mother, one son, the Ottomans kept any single woman from dominating the harem or threatening the throne. Here's how it worked. Once a concubine gave birth to a son, she was elevated in rank, and often released from further sexual duty to the Sultan. Her role became focused on raising her child, grooming him for future power. This policy ensured that multiple women in the harem, Each had a stake in succession, creating a balance that prevented dangerous monopolies of influence. The system also created fierce rivalries. Each mother knew that the survival of her son could mean the death of others. In Ottoman tradition, when a new sultan ascended the throne, his brothers were often executed to prevent civil war. This grim practice, called fratricide, meant that a mother's ambitions were tied directly to her child's survival and his rival's destruction. At the same time, daughters were less politically threatening and thus less restricted. Many concubines gave birth to several girls, but only one boy. These daughters could be married off to powerful officials or governors, further binding the empire together through political marriages. For the women of the harem then, childbirth was both a blessing and a curse. Bearing a son guaranteed prestige, wealth, and status, but it also placed them at the center of a deadly game of succession where alliances and betrayals determined life or death. And while the law of one mother, one son kept dynastic balance, it also meant the sultan needed a constant supply of new concubines, which gave rise to a strict and sometimes shocking system of selection, training, and preparation. The women who entered the Ottoman harem did not arrive by accident. They were chosen, inspected, and carefully prepared for their potential role in the sultan's private chambers. The process was as calculated as a military campaign, with rules and rituals guiding every step. Most women came into the harem through slave markets, tribute from conquered territories, or as gifts from foreign rulers. They were usually of extraordinary beauty, with traits that matched Ottoman ideals: pale skin, bright eyes, delicate features, and youth. But beauty alone was not enough. Each candidate was scrutinized for health, physical condition, and even temperament. Once selected, the women entered a rigorous system of training. They were taught the arts of refinement, music, dance, poetry, calligraphy, and the proper etiquette of court life. They learned how to walk gracefully, how to speak with elegance, and how to flatter without overstepping boundaries. These skills were not for personal development, they were weapons of survival. A woman who pleased the sultan could rise to incredible power. A woman who failed could vanish into obscurity. But perhaps the most disturbing part of this preparation was the instruction for the bedroom. Older concubines and eunuchs taught new recruits the arts of seduction, from gestures to movements, turning intimacy into performance. Every detail mattered: the way she bathed, the scent of her hair, the rhythm of her voice when speaking to the sultan. Nothing was left to chance. It was not just the sultan who judged them. Behind the scenes, senior women of the harem, especially the valide sultan, the sultan's mother, held enormous authority. They monitored the concubines' training, tested their obedience, and decided who was worthy to be presented to the ruler. The valide sultan's approval could make or break a woman's future. To survive in this world, concubines had to live under constant vigilance. They could not form close friendships, as rivals lurked everywhere. They could not trust entirely in beauty, since youth faded quickly. They had to learn the delicate balance between submission and influence, between obedience and ambition. By the time a woman was finally chosen to share the sultan's bed, she was no longer just a girl. She had been reshaped, disciplined, polished, and conditioned into a tool of the empire's most private politics. And yet, even once she reached the sultan's chamber, the rules did not relax. On the contrary, they became even more bizarre, because some sultans had strange obsessions that turned the harem into a stage for their darkest fantasies. Among all the Ottoman rulers, few embodied the darker side of harem life more than Sultan Ibrahim I, often remembered as Ibrahim the Mad. His reign in the 17th century turned the harem into a theatre of obsession, extravagance, and cruelty. Ibrahim's desires went far beyond the carefully crafted rituals of intimacy. He was known for his bizarre fetishes and dangerous whims, which disrupted the order of the harem and left lasting scars on its women. Historical accounts describe how Ibrahim demanded extreme indulgences. At one point, he ordered a pool filled entirely with perfume, forcing his concubines to bathe in it for his amusement. On another occasion, he commanded his attendants to bring him the fattest woman in the empire. When they found her, weighing over 300 pounds, he showered her with gifts, declaring her his favourite. But his eccentricity could also turn violent. Suspecting infidelity among his concubines, Ibrahim ordered the execution of more than 200 women from the harem in a single day. They were tied in sacks and drowned in the Bosphorus, a massacre born not of strategy, but of paranoia. His reign revealed the dangerous truth of the harem, that its women, no matter how carefully trained or protected, were ultimately at the mercy of the Sultan's moods. A single outburst could elevate one concubine to unimaginable luxury, while condemning others to death. Ibrahim's madness was extreme, but it was not unique. Other sultans also left their mark on the harem with personal quirks, each bending the rules of intimacy to their own tastes. The difference was that Ibrahim's obsessions exposed just how fragile the lives of the women were, balanced precariously on the whims of a single man. Yet even Ibrahim's chaos did not erase the underlying structure of the harem. Beneath the indulgence and cruelty lay a machine of meticulous organization, where every visit, every choice, and every pregnancy was recorded, tracked, and controlled. The Ottoman harem might appear from the outside as a place of indulgence and chaos, but in reality, it operated with astonishing precision. Behind the silks and perfumes lay ledgers, schedules, and bureaucrats who treated intimacy as if it were state business because, in truth, it was. Every woman in the harem was carefully catalogued. Records detailed her name, origin, training, and physical attributes. Her movements were tracked, her health monitored, and her time with the Sultan meticulously logged. Nothing was left to chance. If she was chosen to spend a night with the Sultan, it was noted in official registers, along with the outcome of that encounter. The purpose of this system was not romance, it was dynastic control. The empire needed to know which women might be pregnant, which children could be heirs, and how to prevent disputes over legitimacy. This was why intimacy was never casual. It was planned, documented, and rotated according to strict rules. The Sultan's partners were selected on a rotation that prevented favoritism. No single woman was allowed too much time in the Sultan's bed. This ensured balance in the harem, reduced jealousy among the concubines, and minimized the risk of one mother producing too many sons, a direct violation of the one mother, one son principle. At the heart of this system stood the chief black eunuch Kuzlar Arsi, one of the most powerful figures in the empire. He controlled access to the Sultan, guarded the harem, and enforced the rules of selection. No concubine could approach the ruler without his approval. In many ways, he acted as the gatekeeper of the Sultan's most private life. Even pregnancies were monitored like matters of state. Once a concubine conceived, her status changed instantly. She was removed from the regular rotation, given special privileges, and shielded from rivals. Her child represented the empire's future, and her body became both sacred and heavily surveilled. This bureaucracy stripped intimacy of any spontaneity. What should have been private desire became a machine of control, where even the Sultan's passions were subject to schedules and ledgers. In the Ottoman harem, love was irrelevant. Duty, power, and legacy were everything. And this obsession with control was reflected not only in records and routines, but even in the very architecture of the harem itself, a palace built as much for surveillance as for luxury. Architecture and surveillance, a palace of watchful eyes. The grandeur of the Ottoman harem at Topkapi Palace often dazzled foreign visitors. Gilded tiles, stained glass, and opulent courtyards that seemed to whisper of luxury. Yet beneath this splendor lay a different reality. The harem was not only a place of beauty, it was a fortress of control and surveillance. The very design of the harem reflected its purpose. Corridors were narrow and winding, deliberately built to restrict movement and prevent escapes. Windows were covered with lattices that allowed women to look out without being seen. The layout created layers of confinement. The deeper one went, the tighter the restrictions became, until at the innermost chambers, the women lived in near complete isolation. Eunuchs, especially the black eunuchs led by the chief eunuch, patrolled these spaces constantly. They controlled every doorway, monitored every visit, and ensured that no unauthorized man could ever set foot inside. For the women, this meant that their lives were lived under permanent watch. Every step, every whisper was overheard by someone. Even the Sultan himself was not entirely free. His movements through the harem were tracked, and his visits were orchestrated according to strict routines. The palace was designed to remind him that his private desires were inseparable from his public duties. Visitors from Europe often imagined the harem as a playground of indulgence. In reality, it was closer to a military installation. Guards, gates, and hidden observation points ensured order. The splendor was real, but so was the iron discipline behind it. For the concubines, this meant their gilded surroundings were a paradox, beautiful but suffocating. They lived among dazzling mosaics and delicate fountains, yet they could not walk freely, could not speak openly, and could never escape the constant gaze of the eunuchs who guarded them. The harem's architecture was a physical embodiment of its rules. Intimacy was choreographed, privacy was denied, and every relationship was shaped by watchful eyes. And when a concubine was finally chosen to spend a night with the Sultan, the control did not stop at the threshold of his chamber. The preparation for such an encounter followed its own set of rigid rules and rituals. Preparation and ritual, the silent rules of the Sultan's bed. Even when a concubine was chosen for the ultimate honor to share the Sultan's bed, her experience was anything but spontaneous. The night unfolded like a carefully staged performance, governed by rituals and silent rules that left no room for error. Before entering the Sultan's chamber, the woman underwent hours of preparation. She was bathed in scented water, her skin rubbed with oils, her hair perfumed and braided to perfection. Every detail was managed: the silk gown she wore, the jewels adorning her body, even the way she walked into the room. These were not luxuries, they were expectations, part of a system designed to turn intimacy into ceremony. Once inside, silence reigned. Concubines were forbidden to speak unless spoken to. They were expected to move with grace, to follow invisible scripts passed down through training, and to anticipate the Sultan's moods without hesitation. Any mistake, an awkward gesture, a clumsy movement, a word spoken out of turn could mean losing favor forever. Even after the act, the rules continued. The woman was not allowed to linger. By dawn, she returned to her quarters, her fate uncertain. If she conceived, her status rose dramatically, perhaps even to that of the Sultan's consort and the mother of a future heir. If not, she re-entered the cycle of waiting, training, and competition, never sure if she would be chosen again. The harem system extended to verification as well. Eunuchs and attendants monitored signs of pregnancy, inspected health, and recorded outcomes in ledgers. What should have been a private moment between two people was transformed into a bureaucratic process, where passion was overshadowed by politics and control. In this way, even the Sultan's most personal encounters were never truly private. Every touch, every embrace, every whispered moment existed within the framework of the state. And this was the ultimate truth of the harem. Behind its glittering walls, nothing was left to chance. From architecture to ritual, from training to surveillance, everything served one purpose: to control desire, to regulate intimacy, and to ensure the survival of the dynasty above all else.